When the desperate plea of an elderly man to access his own money was met with the cold policies of the bank, no one could have imagined that a 75-year-old NBA legend would become his unexpected savior. The story begins as the glass doors of LA Bank tremble open. David Moyes, an elderly man with sun-weathered hands, clutches his wooden cane tightly. Two security guards nearly drag him toward the exit. His worn leather shoes scrape against the floor, producing a painful sound in the otherwise silent bank.
Once again, sir, we've told you repeatedly. There are no exceptions.
The banker's cold voice cuts through the hushed murmurs of other customers.
Without updated digital verification, we cannot access your account, no matter how long you've been banking here.
Walter's voice trembles, his dignity crumbling with every desperate plea. Please, I've been coming to this branch every month for 30 years. Sarah used to help me, she knows me. His hands fumble with a pile of old papers, utility bills, his veteran ID, his social security letter. The papers slip from his fingers, scattering across the floor like autumn leaves. A few customers move to help, but the security guards wave them away.
Sir, you are causing a disturbance.
A tall security guard barks. Walter chokes on his words. My wife's medicine. The pharmacy closes at 5. I just need to withdraw my pension, it's in my account. Other customers shift uncomfortably. Some roll their eyes, while others look on with concern. A young mother shields her child's eyes, and an elderly woman clutches her pearl necklace, whispering, "This isn't right. This isn't right at all." Then, everything erupts. If you do not leave voluntarily, we will have to escort you out. Another security guard warns, gripping Walter's elbow. Tears streak his sun-worn cheeks as they push him toward the door. His cane taps against the marble floor with each unsteady step. The scattered papers at his feet tell only part of his life story. Each one represents a chapter: his social security letter, his veteran ID, his banking statements from 30 years of loyalty to this institution. But today, not a single piece of paper can grant him access to his own money. The reason for Walter's desperate visit is simple. His wife, Margaret, had her cancer prescription changed by the doctor that morning. The new medication costs $600 and must be purchased before the weekend. Their trusted Anderson pharmacy closes at 5 p.m. That left only 2 hours to act. Mr. David's sharp voice cut through the murmuring crowd in the lobby, drawing everyone's attention. Taylor Clinton, the newly appointed bank manager, stepped out of her office. She had been fast-tracked through the National Financial Group's special training program and was selected as manager 3 months ago during the bank's merger. Her reputation for implementing new security protocols had made her a rising star in the company. However, today, she would face a major test. Taylor, I've been banking here since 1989, Mr. David's voice rang out, firm and unwavering. Every teller knows my name. Taylor met his gaze and gently gestured toward her office. The modern glass-walled space exuded transparency and order. David, leaning heavily on his cane, followed her inside. The security guards, sensing the tension, kept their distance, careful not to interfere. Taylor settled into her chair and opened her computer. She began explaining, I understand you're trying to withdraw funds from your pension account. However, you haven't completed the mandatory digital verification upgrade required under the bank's new policy. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she pulled up his account file. We sent you 4 notifications regarding these security updates. David nodded, but his voice wavered. Taylor tried to help me with the bank's tech department, but she's been too sick from chemotherapy. She doesn't have the strength to assist me anymore. Taylor glanced at her screen, where an urgent security alert outlined clear directives. The bank's new security system, implemented as part of the merger with National Financial Group, required all accounts to undergo enhanced digital verification. This included biometric scanning, multi-factor authentication, and enrollment in a smartphone banking app. "We can't authenticate your identity under the new federal guidelines," Taylor explained, her tone gentle but firm. "These measures are designed to protect against fraud, especially for senior customers like yourself." David's expression tightened as he gripped his cane. "I have my driver's license, my veteran ID, and even my original account documents from 1989. All of them prove who I am." His voice carried both pride and exhaustion. Taylor shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but physical documents are no longer sufficient. The new system requires digital verification through the bank's security app. This is a liability issue." She turned her monitor toward him, pointing to the mandatory digital ID registration through a third-party service, which included biometric and multi-factor authentication. David's voice cracked. "But I don't have a smartphone. Taylor and I share an old flip phone. It's always been enough, until today." Taylor tensed her fingers, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She recalled an email from corporate headquarters that morning, emphasizing that there were no exceptions to security protocol violations. Any breach would lead to an immediate review of management positions, including hers. Her entire banking career hinged on compliance. "Perhaps a family member could help you set up the digital system," Taylor suggested, knowing that the verification process would take several days to complete. David looked at her, his eyes filled with both wisdom and desperation. "My son is stationed in Germany, and Taylor's sister won't arrive until next week to help her. But the medication the doctor prescribed, Taylor can't wait until next week." Taylor felt caught between two worlds. On her screen, she could see David's decades of careful savings, his account history never once overdrawn. And yet, today, all of it was locked away, inaccessible due to a digital verification requirement. A glaring red alert flashed at the top of her screen, marking his account as unverified and restricted. Outside the office, the bank lobby had gone silent. Customers were watching the conversation unfold. Many of them recognized David, the beloved basketball coach of the community, the man who had spent countless evenings in the old gym, who had bought uniforms for kids who couldn't afford them, who had written recommendation letters for students heading to college. His presence was woven into the fabric of the neighborhood. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each passing minute bringing Taylor's medication deadline closer. Every moment, the bank seemed like an invisible barrier between David and the help he so desperately needed. Taylor stood up, her decision made. She knew that the security system the bank had implemented was designed to protect people like David, but in this moment, it was preventing him from helping his wife. And despite the urgency of the situation, she had no choice but to follow protocol. The security guards, who had been observing, sensed that it was best to let Mr. David leave. The entire bank quietly witnessed an encounter that ended with no resolution, holding on to the belief that rules, no matter how difficult, must be followed. At that moment, Shaquille O'Neal and his teenage daughter, Myra, were pulling into the bank's parking lot. As they approached the building's entrance, they noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench near the doorway, his shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. His sun-worn hands clutched a wooden cane. "Dad, look," Myra whispered, tugging on her father's sleeve. The sight of an old man crying wasn't something you saw every day, especially not outside a bank in broad daylight. Scattered at his feet were a few papers, medical prescriptions, bank statements, and what appeared to be old photographs spilling out of a worn leather wallet. Shaq stopped, his towering 7 feet 1 inch frame casting a shadow over the scene. "Sir, are you all right?" His deep voice was gentle, a stark contrast to his imposing presence. David Moyes looked up quickly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The dignity of a coach, ingrained over decades, was still present despite his situation. "I'm sorry," he murmured, scrambling to gather his scattered documents. "It's just, my wife, Taylor. She needs her cancer treatment medication, and they won't let me." His voice cracked as he gestured toward the bank's entrance. Myra knelt down, helping him collect the fallen papers. She picked up a photograph, one of a high school championship basketball team. "Dad, look," she said, holding it up. "That's Coach David. They were talking about him at camp today." Shaq's expression shifted as the pieces came together, the stories he had heard earlier about a coach who had dedicated his life to the community, who never turned away a kid who couldn't afford to play, who had taken on extra jobs just to keep youth programs running. Through his tears, David explained the situation, the new digital verification requirements, the medication deadline, and his wife waiting at home. Every word seemed heavier than the last. "I've been banking here for over 40 years, David said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "And now they treat me like I'm nobody. Like those years meant nothing, just because I can't use their smartphone app." Myra, still holding her phone, scrolled through the bank's website. Her young fingers moved quickly over the screen as she read through the policies. "Dad, this isn't right," she said, her voice carrying the certainty of teenage justice. "They can't do this." Before she could finish, Shaq had already made his decision. Losing his sister to cancer, just the mention of medication and treatment struck a deeply personal chord. He extended a hand to Coach David Moyes. "Let's go back in there together," he said, helping the older man to his feet. Sometimes, people just need a reminder that behind every policy, there's a person. As they stepped toward the bank entrance, the other customers began to notice. Phones came out. Whispers spread. Social media started buzzing with the unfolding story. The glass doors slid open, and the bank lobby fell silent as the unexpected trio walked in, the NBA legend, the teenage girl recording everything, and the dignified coach who seemed to stand a little taller with every step. Taylor Clinton, who had just returned to her office, stopped in her tracks as she saw them approaching. The energy in the room shifted instantly. This was no longer just about an elderly man struggling with digital banking. This had become a moment of moral reckoning for an institution that had lost its human purpose in its pursuit of modernization. "Miss Taylor," Shaq's voice echoed through the hall with the same intensity he once brought to championship games. "I think we need to have a conversation about what banking really means to a community." The tension in the room was electric. Taylor's tablet trembled slightly in her hands as she looked from Shaq to David. She smoothed down her blazer, an instinctive gesture that didn't quite hide her unease. "Mr. O'Neal," she began, her corporate training evident in every syllable, "while I understand your concerns, there are federal regulations that we simply cannot." "Let me stop you right there," Shaq interrupted. His 7 feet 1 inch frame seemed to fill the entire office as he leaned slightly forward. "I sit on the boards of multiple banks," he said. "I've been involved in more mergers and acquisitions than I can count. So when you talk about federal regulations, I know exactly what they say and what they don't say." The other bank employees, now gathered on the perimeter of the scene, looked pale. Their ordinary Monday afternoon had turned into something resembling a high-stakes courtroom drama, with Shaq as both judge and jury, ready to take action. "Tell me something," Shaq continued, pulling out his phone. "I just looked up Coach David's banking history. 43 years. Never overdrawn. Consistent deposits. And that doesn't mean anything to you? That's not enough to verify this man's identity?" Myra, still recording, zoomed in on the stark contrast, her father's sleek, modern smartphone versus David's worn-out passbook. A visual metaphor for the battle between progress and humanity. "You're wasting this man's time because a computer tells you to," Shaq said, his voice dropping, now carrying the weight of personal experience. I know what it's like to watch time slip away while bureaucracy moves at its own pace. Every minute we stand here arguing about apps and digital signatures, Coach David's wife is waiting for the medication she needs to survive. Taylor's tablet slipped slightly in her grip. "Sir, I understand the emotional aspect, but you?" Shaq stood up straight to his full height. A few bank employees instinctively took a step back. "From where I'm standing," he said, "and I'm standing pretty damn tall, I see an institution that's forgotten its purpose. A bank isn't just about securing money, it's about securing trust." He gestured toward the hallway, where customers had pressed their phones against the office's glass walls, recording every moment. "Look out there. Everyone watching this knows Coach David. They trust him. Their kids, their futures. But the bank where he's kept his money for over 4 decades can't trust him enough to access his own savings." The air conditioner hummed in the sudden silence. Taylor's face had lost its color as she realized the implications. This wasn't just about one customer anymore, this was about the bank's reputation in an era where one viral video could destroy a corporate brand in an instant. "This is what's going to happen," Shaq said, his tone shifting from confrontational to resolute. "We're going to help Coach David access his money, today, right now. And tomorrow, you're going to reevaluate every policy that prioritizes digital convenience over human dignity. Because if you don't..." He paused, letting the moment sink in. "I will personally help Coach David move every last cent into a bank that remembers what community means." The unspoken threat wasn't just in his words, it was in the hundreds of recording phones outside. News vans were already pulling up to the curb. This was becoming the story. Taylor looked down at her tablet, then at David's passbook, then at Shaquille O'Neal, standing firmly between her and business as usual. In that moment, she had to choose between corporate policy and human decency, between digital progress and moral responsibility. The clock read 4:47 p.m. Taylor's medication deadline was closing in. And in a small bank office in Middle America, the future of banking itself seemed to hang in the balance. At 4:49 p.m., Taylor Clinton made a decision that would later be cited in banking industry journals and social media case studies. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for David's passbook. "Let's process your withdrawal right now, Coach David," she said, her voice carrying a new note of humanity. "We'll use the emergency override protocol. I will take full responsibility for the transaction." As David's transaction was processed, Shaq noticed a familiar signature photo on the old coach's phone, one of the few pieces of modern technology he used. It was a faded image from 1985, showing a much younger David coaching a skinny teenager who would later go on to play in the NBA. "You coached Marcus Wilson?" Shaq raised an eyebrow. David nodded, offering a brief, weary smile. "Taught him that skyhook. You could never stop that shot." For a moment, the troubles melted away in the warmth of memory. Shaq's deep laugh filled the office. "That man killed me with that move in '96. That was your signature move." At 4:53 p.m., David had his money. And sometimes, the biggest assists in life happen off the court. The final handshake in the golden evening light, a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won through game-winning shots, but through simple acts of human dignity. What would you do if you saw an elderly person being turned away by a business just because they weren't tech-savvy? Do you think the bank should have helped Walter verify his account instead of simply pushing him out the door? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.